6 o'clock in the evening, June 13, 1901, 24-year-old Jocelyn Clifford Redpath arrives at his family's mansion on Sherbrooke Street in Montreal. According to his older brother Peter, Clifford looks tired and unwell. He has been preparing for his bar examinations, and he goes upstairs to visit their mother, Ada, who has spent much of the previous year confined to her bedroom. A few seconds later, Peter hears a gunshot, then two more. He races upstairs and, according to his sworn testimony, breaks down the bedroom door. Inside, he finds his mother and younger brother lying on the floor, only a few feet apart. Before the night is over, both Ada and Clifford will be dead. The family will already be preparing to handle the matter privately, and the police, apparently, will never be called. This is the story of the Redpath family deaths. Two people shot inside one of Montreal's wealthiest homes, a private inquest completed within hours, and a verdict that still does not fully explain what happened inside that bedroom. The mystery begins decades before the gunshots, with the fortune that put the Redpaths inside Montreal's wealthiest circle. The Redpath name was, by 1901, one of the most recognized in the city, and the man responsible for that was John Redpath. John Redpath was born in Scotland in the town of Earlston in 1796, and he emigrated to Montreal in 1816 with training as a stonemason. He built things. His crews cut and laid the stone for Notre Dame Church, and he later worked on lock construction along the Lachine Canal and, with a partner, on the Rideau Canal. He fathered 17 children between two wives, the first of whom died of cholera in 1834. And in 1854, he founded the Canada Sugar Refining Company on the bank of the Lachine Canal, Canada's first sugar refinery. That company would eventually become Redpath Sugar, a name still recognized on grocery shelves today. Around 1837, John Redpath built himself an estate house on land he had purchased on the slopes of Mount Royal. He called it Terrace Bank. It is a name that gets attached, incorrectly, to almost every version of this story that circulates online. But Terrace Bank was John Redpath's house, built for himself, decades before the events in this video. The deaths we are about to walk through happened somewhere else entirely, in a different Redpath home a short distance away. By the turn of the century, the Redpath family sat comfortably inside Montreal's Golden Square Mile, the neighborhood where the country's wealthiest families built their mansions almost on top of one another. And one of those mansions belonged to a woman named Ada Redpath. Ada Maria Mills Redpath was the daughter of John Easton Mills, a merchant who was elected mayor of Montreal in 1846 and who died of typhus the following year after personally caring for victims of an epidemic sweeping through the city's fever sheds. In 1867, she married John James Redpath, the youngest son of the sugar magnate by his first wife. Her marriage contract, drawn up before the wedding, specified that she would control her own assets, as though no marriage had taken place at all, an unusual arrangement for the time, and one that would matter later. John James worked briefly at the family refinery before leaving to become an officer in the Victoria Rifles. He died in 1884, the cause of death recorded simply as paralysis. Ada was left a widow at just over 40 years old, with 5 children to raise on her own. Those 5 children were Amy, the eldest and only daughter, born in 1868, Peter Whiteford, born in 1869, John Reginald, known as Reggie, born in 1871, Harold, born in 1873, and the youngest, Jocelyn Clifford, known to the family as Cliff, born in 1876. By 1900, Ada's health had deteriorated badly. She suffered from what doctors of the era called melancholia, along with neuralgia in her jaw, ulceration in her eye, painful joints, and chronic insomnia. Her physician, Dr. Thomas Roddick, had prescribed prolonged bed rest, and by all accounts, Ada rarely left her room. Historian Anne-Marie Adams, who has studied the case in detail alongside architectural historian David Theodore, has described this period as amounting to something close to solitary confinement, carried out inside her own bedroom, for months at a stretch. It fell to Amy, the eldest daughter, to run the household in her mother's place. Amy hired staff, paid the bills, and nursed her mother personally. Peter, the eldest son, was chronically unwell himself, suffering from sciatica and what would later be diagnosed as tuberculosis. Reggie had already left Montreal years earlier to ranch in Alberta. Harold split his time between Montreal and England, and Clifford, the youngest, had just graduated from law school at McGill in 1900 and was studying to sit his bar exams. That was the immediate family surrounding Ada in the spring of 1901. A frail, largely bedridden mother, an overworked eldest daughter, a sickly eldest son, and a youngest son under the pressure of exams, coming home most evenings to a house that had, for years, revolved entirely around his mother's illness. The house itself stood at 1065 Sherbrooke Street West, at the corner of Redpath Street, designed by architect John James Brown, and purchased by Ada in November of 1870. It sat behind an imposing portico with a long front lawn, one of roughly a dozen Redpath family houses that once occupied a stretch of land running from Sherbrooke Street up toward what is now Dr. Penfield Avenue. No interior photographs of the house are known to survive from this period, so historians have leaned on a nearly identical neighboring house, built by the same architect for a different family, to reconstruct what the rooms inside would have looked like. Adams has argued that homes like this were built with a kind of built-in privacy, long front halls and heavy portico entrances that discouraged outsiders from seeing or hearing anything happening within. The deep entrance, an enclosed hall, also made the interior unusually private. Whatever happened upstairs could remain hidden from the street. In the spring of 1901, the household living inside that house consisted of Ada, her daughter Amy, her son Clifford, and 3 live-in servants. Physicians and tutors came and went as regular visitors. It was, on the surface, an unremarkable, well-off Montreal household. And then came the evening of June 13th. According to Peter Whiteford Redpath's own sworn testimony, given the following day, Clifford arrived home around 6 o'clock that evening. He seemed unwell and tired, and Peter would later say his brother had been working hard preparing for his bar exams. Clifford went upstairs to their mother's room. A few seconds later, Peter heard a gunshot, followed by 2 more. Peter raced upstairs and, according to his sworn testimony, broke down the bedroom door. His statement to the coroner the next day put it plainly: "I heard a shot from a firearm, followed by 2 others. I ran up and broke down the door. I saw my mother lying on the floor, and several feet from her my brother, also lying in a pool of blood, a revolver a foot away from him near his hand." Clifford had suffered a gunshot wound to the head. Surviving accounts disagree about its precise location, variously placing it near the left temple or above one eye. That inconsistency makes any attempt to reconstruct the exact position of the weapon difficult. Ada's wounds were less ambiguous. Doctors reported she had been shot twice, once in the right shoulder and once in the back of the head. Servant Rosa Shallow testified that she saw 2 revolvers near Clifford's body and stated she had never seen a firearm in Ada's room at any point. Another servant, Charles James Fleet, gave the coroner an account of the weapons themselves. "Dr. Campbell handed the 2 revolvers over to me, which I locked away and am now producing. 2 chambers in one, and one in the other are empty. Had never seen those revolvers before. One revolver, in other words, had 2 empty chambers. The other had 1. Peter's own testimony appears to account for those 3 empty chambers. He said he heard 1 shot, followed by 2 more. But several newspaper reports published at the time described only 2 shots being heard. Whether those reports came from a different witness, an early misunderstanding, or incomplete information is unknown. The evidence does not leave us with a simple missing shot mystery. It leaves us with something messier, conflicting accounts of how many shots were heard at all. The police apparently were not called. According to newspaper reporting from the following days, officers only became aware of what had happened indirectly, and the family reportedly provided investigators with very little information. What happened next moved with a speed that would be almost unthinkable in a modern investigation. Under Quebec law at the time, a coroner had wide discretion over where and how quickly an inquest was held. The law required a sudden or unexplained death to be examined by a coroner and a jury of local citizens, but it did not require that examination to take place in a courthouse or even in a public building at all. A coroner could legally convene his jury inside a private home, hear witnesses in a single sitting, and close the matter the same day, provided the jury reached a unanimous verdict. That flexibility was ordinary procedure in 1901. In the hands of a family with the Redpath standing, it also meant the entire proceeding could unfold entirely on their own terms, in their own parlor, before a jury they had every opportunity to influence simply by hosting it. On June 14th, the day after the deaths, a coroner's inquest was convened inside the mansion itself. Coroner Ed McMahon presided over a jury of 13 prominent Montreal men, assembled in the family's own parlor. Witnesses included Peter, the family's longtime physician, Dr. Thomas Roddick, two additional doctors named Hugh Patton and Rollo Campbell, and the two servants, Rosa Shallow and Charles James Fleet. Dr. Roddick, who had treated the family for 20 years, testified that Clifford was epileptic and, in his words, not responsible for his actions before, during, or after his seizures. Dr. Rollo Campbell added that he had noticed foam around Clifford's mouth, which he described as a sign of a recent epileptic episode. Based on that testimony, the jury returned its verdict the same day. Ada, the jury found, had died from a gunshot wound apparently inflicted by her son Jocelyn Clifford Redpath while he was, in the jury's words, unconscious of what he was doing and temporarily insane owing to an epileptic attack. Clifford, the jury concluded, had then turned the gun on himself while suffering from that same temporary insanity, equally unconscious of his own actions. Both bodies were buried within 48 hours, on June 15th, in the family plot at Mount Royal Cemetery, following funerals at St. John the Evangelist Church. Ada's estate was valued at $179,086.06. No living member of the Redpath family was ever arrested, charged, or committed to an institution in connection with the deaths. The person named responsible by the inquest was Clifford himself, and he was already dead. This is where many modern retellings go wrong. There was no surviving son locked away somewhere for the rest of his life, quietly guarding a family secret. The inquest closed the case in a single afternoon, inside the family's own home, based on a brief body of testimony in which the family's longtime physician supplied the central medical explanation. But the medical explanation was far less secure than the speed of the verdict made it appear. The claim that Clifford had a known history of epilepsy appears to rest mainly on Dr. Roddick's testimony. Other physicians described physical signs they believed were consistent with a recent attack. Dr. Rollo Campbell, for example, pointed to foam around Clifford's mouth. But the surviving family papers contain no clear reference to earlier seizures, and researchers have identified no surviving medical record documenting a previous diagnosis. The inquest therefore had testimony about Clifford's condition after the shooting, but very little surviving evidence showing a known history of epilepsy before it. Roddick's own movements create another contradiction. He testified that he came to the mansion and examined both Ada and Clifford, yet contemporary newspaper accounts reported that he did not return to Montreal until the following day. The surviving record does not clearly resolve how both accounts could be true, and it is Roddick's account of Clifford's medical history that the entire verdict rests on. The hospital record creates another problem. Several newspapers reported at the time that Clifford had been rushed to the Royal Victoria Hospital and had died there around midnight. But no admission record for him has ever been found in the hospital's surviving patient registers. If he was never treated there, that account was simply wrong. If he was treated there, the relevant admission record has either been lost, omitted, or never entered. The missing records do not disprove the official verdict. They simply show how little evidence supported it. Clifford may well have suffered a genuine seizure that no one had documented before, but the case for it is thinner than the speed of the verdict suggests, and the family's silence in the years that followed only deepened the uncertainty. 2 months after the deaths, Amy wrote to a sister-in-law about what she called the unpleasant business of destroying letters. The comment is suggestive, although it does not reveal which letters were destroyed or why. Over the next century, the gaps filled with theories. Some came from contemporary reporting, others appeared much later. The official finding, again, was murder followed by suicide, both attributed to an epileptic episode. That is the inquest's conclusion, and it remains the only formal ruling the case has ever received. A second, earlier version of events appeared in the immediate newspaper coverage on June 14th, before the inquest verdict was handed down. The Montreal Daily Star, the Gazette, and La Presse, which ran the story under a headline translating roughly to blood-soaked high-life tragedy, all reported that Ada herself had a history of depression and insomnia and suggested she may have attempted to take her own life, with Clifford shot while trying to stop her before the gun turned back on Ada. Papers as far away as the New York Times and the Calgary Herald picked up versions of the story within a day. That framing was displaced by the inquest's ruling the following day, but it shows that a very different account was already circulating before the official explanation had been settled. A third theory involves inheritance. Ada's estate was worth a substantial sum, and some popular retellings of the case have suggested a financial dispute among the children as a possible motive. The surviving estate records, though, do not reveal a documented inheritance dispute strong enough to establish a motive. Ada's assets were legally separate from the larger sugar fortune because of her 1867 marriage contract, and her will involved all 5 children as executors, making the idea of one sibling automatically seizing the entire estate far less straightforward than some retellings suggest. A later oral history theory, traced to Montreal historian and tour operator Donovan King of Haunted Montreal, suggested that Clifford may have been hiding a deeply personal scandal. No surviving document confirms the claim, and it should not be treated as evidence. The final theory, the one that has drawn the most serious academic attention, is not really a theory about who pulled the trigger at all. It is a theory about what the family did afterward. Adams and her co-authors, writing in the peer-reviewed journal Material Culture Review, argue that the surviving Redpaths moved quickly to keep the event out of public view and to fold the deaths back into the norms of respectable upper-class conduct. Their argument is not that the police were bribed or that evidence was criminally destroyed. It is that a family with the resources and social standing of the Redpaths had other tools available: an inquest held inside their own parlor, a same-day verdict, burial within 48 hours, and testimony from a trusted physician that provided the medical explanation on which the official finding depended. This is a meaningfully different claim from an ordinary murder theory. It does not argue that anyone lied about how Ada and Clifford died. It argues that the process used to explain their deaths was shaped, at every stage, by the same social standing that built the mansion in the first place. Peter Redpath's health, already fragile, did not improve after that night. He died of tuberculosis in Redlands, California, in May of 1902, less than a year after his mother and brother, without a will and without children. His share of the estate passed back to his surviving siblings. Amy remained in the Sherbrooke Street house and, in 1906, married the family's own longtime physician, Dr. Thomas Roddick, the same man whose inquest testimony had closed the case 5 years earlier. In the years between the deaths and that marriage, Amy continued to run the household exactly as she had before June of 1901, managing correspondence, settling her mother's outstanding accounts, and handling the family's public face, the same role she had held while Ada was alive. It was Amy who wrote the letter, 2 months after the deaths, mentioning the destruction of correspondence, and it is largely through the letters she did not destroy that historians have been able to reconstruct any of this story at all. As Lady Roddick, she went on to become one of McGill University's most significant benefactors, funding the Roddick Gates that still stand at the university's Sherbrooke Street entrance today. She died in 1954, and the house where her mother and brother died was demolished the following year. Reggie Redpath died in Victoria, British Columbia, in November of 1951. Harold died near Victoria as well, in December of 1948. Redpath Sugar, meanwhile, carried on almost entirely untouched by any of it. Leadership of the company had already passed to a different branch of Montreal's business elite years earlier, and the firm continued operating, merging, and changing ownership through most of the 20th century. It still exists today as a subsidiary of an American sugar company, operating on Toronto's waterfront, one of the oldest continuously running companies in the country. No trial, no surviving suspect, no mansion left standing to draw visitors or tour groups, just a coroner's report, a handful of contradictory newspaper clippings, and a family that left almost no surviving discussion of what happened. More than a century later, the surviving evidence still refuses to settle into one clear account. Peter swore that he heard 3 shots. Several newspapers reported only two. 3 chambers were empty across 2 revolvers. Clifford was supposedly taken to a hospital that has no surviving record of admitting him, and the medical condition used to explain both deaths was accepted during an inquest that began and ended inside the family mansion. The official verdict named Clifford as both killer and victim, and before its contradictions could be examined through any broader investigation, both he and his mother had already been buried. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching, and if you want more stories like this one, the subscribe button is right there waiting for you. I will see you in the next one.